Hello, interwebs. My name is Trzupek. I'm a chemist. I'm an author. I'm an air quality expert. I've been doing air quality work for 35 some years now. And I'm making this video to talk about Sterigenics in Willowbrook, Illinois, and what's happened to them. Because it's disturbing to me as a scientist and as a citizen and as somebody who understands air quality issues. Essentially, what has happened to Sterigenics is that a newspaper has singled them out for unique action, and politicians, public figures have jumped on the bandwagon, and very little science is involved. Now, the story, of course, is, well, we measured ethylene oxide around the plant. The plant uses ethylene oxide, and ethylene oxide causes cancer. All true. The rest of the story, there are more than 1,000 carcinogens identified by the World Health Organization. One of them, a great many of you who might be watching this morning are enjoying. Caffeine is a carcinogen. People don't talk about it much, but it is. And there's lots of others. Lots and lots of different processes that we depend on to make the goods and services that keep this country running use materials that are hazardous air pollutants, and some of which are carcinogens as well. And I understand chemistry is scary to people who aren't chemists or who don't understand it. But the fact is that there are carcinogens all around us. There are over 1,000 facilities, according to the National Emissions Inventory, which the US EPA maintains, that use ethylene oxide. And it's a very useful chemical. A lot of the plastics, a lot of the cheap but safe material with packaging that you enjoy starts with ethylene oxide. There are over 600,000 sources of benzene, air emissions of benzene, according to the National Emissions Inventory. There are over 10,000 sources of lead emissions. And I could go on and on. You could pick anyone out, any single source out, and do some air monitoring around it and point to a carcinogen and say, this source is dangerous and should be shut down. The fact is, we have a legal process, a permitting process. We have rules in place that are supposed to establish how sources that use potentially dangerous materials are regulated. Sterigenics, to my knowledge, has followed all of those rules that have been duly established, but have been singled out uniquely, and I think only because of newspaper stories published in the Chicago Tribune that are woefully irresponsible and simply tell only a portion of the story. We hear the term fake news a lot. I don't think it's fake news that's the problem. I think it's partial news. Picking out Sterigenics and emissions measured around them singly and uniquely without any context, is incredibly irresponsible. I understand all the people who jumped on the bandwagon. They don't know. And supposedly a newspaper is supposed to be authoritative. They're not. Michael Hawthorne is a despicable person, in my opinion, and his stories are only, you only get one part of the story from anything Hawthorne writes. At least that's been my experience. And that's certainly the case with Sterigenics. So there are literally hundreds of thousands of sources of different carcinogens. And those carcinogens are emitted and are around us in very small quantities, which is the reason most of us don't get cancer. Genetics is, at least as far as I understand, is the biggest contributor to cancers, and so is getting old, which I am. But the sources in the air that are all around us are ubiquitous. They're everywhere. And I don't lose any sleep over them. You shouldn't. But for those of you who criticize Sterigenics because they handle ethylene oxide, no. that every time you start your car, every time you light a fireplace, every time you barbecue in the backyard, you are emitting ethylene oxide. You are emitting polyaromatic hydrocarbons that have also been identified as cancer-causing agents. You are emitting benzene, which has been identified as cancer-causing agents. Now, I don't have a problem with any of that because we're talking, as we are in the case of Sterigenics, extremely small concentrations that don't present a threat or a risk to anybody. And I don't tell you not to drive your car, not to barbecue, not to use your fireplace. Do all those things. But understand that anybody could come after you for doing those things in exactly the same way they've gone after Sterigenics. And that's sad. It really, really is sad. I have no ties to Sterigenics. I'm a scientist. I do air quality work. And this situation, to me, is despicable, disgusting, and I'm embarrassed for everybody involved in the public sector who has created this ridiculous mountain out of something that's not even a molehill. Take care, interwebs. See ya.